Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures Podcast. I'm excited about today's episode with Ken Lundin. He is a extremely experienced, energetic, and obviously passionate sales professional that works with companies that are trying to scale their sales strategies and teams and tactics. So we have a lot of insight and wisdom for you if you are building a company and scaling it, where you're trying to hire and dial in your sales processes and your sales team. If you're an entrepreneur, this has a lot of very tactical wisdom for you. And if you're an investor and you're thinking through those portfolio companies that really could elevate your sales game, I asked Ken a number of questions across a variety of different revenue models and different ways to think about it, really from the perspective of an entrepreneur trying to scale their business. So I really appreciate Ken and his willingness to carve out some time for this episode. So if you are listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there I'll have more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Ken Lundin. All right, Ken, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here. This ought to be a blast.
So a lot of the audience are entrepreneurs, early stage investors, and we talk a lot about just the different stages of growth in a company. And there comes a point when scaling sales and figuring out what to do, how to hire a sales team and how to do all that becomes a large source of questions with entrepreneurs that we work with. So I'd love to just start with the audience, just learn a little bit about you and how you got into this amazing world of venture and sales.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we work a lot with companies that are going through venture capital backed, private equity backed, et cetera. And our goal really is to help give them traction. Like, Will, the number one question asked, or the number one thing said when somebody turns down something they thought they were going to put money in, is they go, "Hey, just show me a little more traction."
Right.
Right. It's the most overused phrase,
right.
We think. But it's because it's true. So yeah, we started 5 years ago with Ken Lundin and Associates, which is sales consulting side of the world. It's systems and it's processes, and we get rid of the black box that sales feels like. Since then, we've added a marketing agency called RevHeat. And then in addition to that, both of those support doing work within the tech stack. So we can definitely systematize. Because at the end of the day, most of the companies who are seeking some sort of funding, it's about building enterprise value. And so we have to make sure that we have the systems and processes in place to actually build enterprise value for those companies.
So what got you personally into the world? Were you always sort of sales marketing oriented, or what's a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. So I've been sales marketing since coming out of college. So much so I was your classic underachiever in college. Right. So a solid 2.7 got me through the dance at the University of Arizona. So we got through, we figured that out. Sales in my background the entire way out. And then I bought my first business in 2006. And then 2006, for those of you particularly who are listening in the United States, with the pandemic, I think we've all lost sight of something that was called the Great Recession. And so I went through the Great Recession, and ultimately that took my first business from me and ended up filing bankruptcy in 2011. So, it was a interesting moment when I found out, as somebody knocked on my door with my 12-year-old wrapped around my hip, that somebody had bought my house from the bank. So, plenty of other time for those stories. But what it taught me then, and the things that I take with me when we work with our clients, and the things I distill upon our consultants to make sure that they understand, is being an entrepreneur is not an ATM. Oftentimes it's quite the opposite. And that brought the real risk of what those great business owners and entrepreneurs are trying to accomplish in the world. There's failure, there's risks. And so what our clients pay us to do is see around corners they don't know exists. And so that really got us there. And then since then, I've had the pleasure of working with companies everywhere from $2 million to $150 billion in revenue.
So what's your advice for the new entrepreneur, somebody who hasn't done the entrepreneurial process? They're growing, let's say they get a little bit of traction. They're still early in their journey, and they're the one who is primarily doing the sales. let's say they're selling into, well, let's do the hypothetical. They're selling into enterprises. They're doing it themselves. They got a little bit of traction, but now they think like, okay, I need to raise money in order to hire a sales team. What's your advice for somebody at that stage? How do you approach the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, yeah, I mean, let's just talk about how they got to where they are, where they think they can raise money, right? So it's founder-led sales. You've had a few sales come to you pretty easy, right? You've done 2 or 3 or 10, or you got 12 or 15 clients. They've come to you pretty easy. They come from a referral base who's personally invested in you, and they give into your enthusiasm about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, which is awesome. They voted with their money instead of their mouth. Step one, you're crushing the moment, right? The problem and the challenge becomes right after that, right? When you go, I'm going to hire a sales team, and there's a big, and Will, you pointed out, you said, I'm going to go from here to here, which for those of you who are listening, I'm raising my hands apart from each other. But that's a massive gap. Because one of the things that founders tend to think of sales is a black box, right? I just pour resources into the top of it. I just have seen no idea of what's going on inside the black box. And then something falls out like a sale. The gap that we missed was, as a founder, the number one mistake that you can make is thinking that early success is scalable, because you haven't figured out yet what the real messaging is that somebody else must convey to your prospects about where they are in the world and how we'll improve that state. And so, like, if I were investing in companies, Will, I mean, one of the most significant things that I would look for to be invested in, and I know this through, I have friends and family and stuff that have raised billions of dollars, with a B even. And one of the things I would look for is, what's your product market fit? What do you say it is? And does that, because here's where everyone screws it up. We launched a marketing agency because marketing companies do this so poorly. What is your actual ICP, your ideal client profile, and your persona? And what problems do you solve for them that have nothing to do with the features and benefits of your thing? Right? I'm not going to spend $50,000 on a prettier PDF because your software gives me better reporting. I'm going to spend $50,000 if you can align to one of my strategic priorities over the course of the next 12 months and give me better data to make better decisions to increase revenue, reduce expense, or reduce risk. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, it's, do we actually align our ICP and our persona based on what's going on in their world? And then second is, have we tested that messaging in a methodical way with data? Because when you go from founder-led, and I'll pause here for it, is when you go from founder-led to sales team-led, you need to go from managing your business with your gut to managing your business on the data that's presented. And I promise you one thing, write it down. Sales is more science than art. Do not let anyone else feed you that lie.
Right. So 100% agree that when you're selling into businesses, you need to identify their strategic goals. You basically want that decision maker to look really good by deciding to sign up with your product or service. How, as a founder, as a salesperson, do you figure out what those strategic priorities are? Like, what's the process of identifying that?
The interesting thing about that question, and we get it all the time, we talking a lot of podcasts, do a lot of webinars, whatever. And the interesting thing about that is that the easiest way to the truth is through the mouth of your prospects. Do a survey. Send an individual LinkedIn message. Hey, we specifically deal in cybersecurity around threat intelligence platforms. With that being said, we are trying to put a survey to find out what the CISO for companies in this range believe their top 5 strategic priorities are for the next 12 months, or what problems are they facing, or whatever. We're running this survey. I'm going to give you the results. Go talk to 25 people. It's interesting that we don't think, like, if you have a product or service that you truly believe can absolutely change the world, let's talk about it as if everybody's going to become a unicorn for a second, right? It's going to change the world. Why wouldn't you go out and have a conversation directly with the people who can tell you what they're thinking? And there's processes you can do this, and there's a lot of great ones. And we've got ones that we give to our people where it's, hey, here's exactly what the LinkedIn template looks like. Here's what the email template looks like. Here's how you structure the conversation. But yeah, that's the number one way. And then somehow if you have, let's say you have a software product that's $9.99 a month and you're going individually and direct to consumer. Well, you probably have an email list of 17,000 people or something. Could run a survey that way too. Your response rate will be under 5%, but 5% of 17,000 is still a lot of opinions. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So those are a couple ways I get it.
Yeah, that's a good tactic, right? You're adding value. You're communicating what you're doing and kind of how you're getting after it. That's a clever way to get about it.
What's really cool, which I didn't tell you, but I'm going to tell you now, is the if you do it right, and if you're actually talking to your ICP at the end of that survey or discovery or questionnaire meeting, you get to give them your value prop over about 3 minutes.
Right.
You get to look, hey, they just told you everything that's wrong with them. Holy cow, they're your ideal client. Wait a second, you might have a product or service that services that. Holy cow, Will, wouldn't it make sense for us to get together next week too?
Right, right.
We can build traction and get customer feedback all in the same loop.
Right, right. So then the $1 million question or $1 billion question is, what is the process of identifying these people, right? I mean, obviously if you have a big network and you're connected, you can get warm introductions to all these decision makers. Awesome. But you probably work with people who don't necessarily have that huge network, and they're lost in the sea of tons of noise. It's hard to get signal out of it. What's your obviously sort of general thematic way that you go about helping people navigate that?
As far as kind of what we're talking about, as far as getting to what your prospect thinks, is that what the question is?
Well, just how to identify the individual to communicate with, right? Because sometimes that's the hardest part, is just building that list of for your sales funnel.
Yeah, I think ultimately that comes down to something. Do you actually know who you're solving the problem for? So I can tell you, it's one of those things. You have to make decisions on where you're going to target an organization. You generally want to target probably no more than, say, one level before somebody who can write a check, right? So we call it the economic buyer and the champion. And, below that line, that champion manages to budgets, right? That's where you get, if you're having salespeople tell you the following, I'm going to tell you that you need help. I know people who can help you. They might be on this call. But if the point is, if you have salespeople telling you that they can only sell deals in the third quarter, it's because they're talking to the wrong level of the organization, and those people only manage to budgets, and you're not presenting value that is being seen more broadly by somebody higher up the chain. Because people above the line, right? And there's a great book called Above and Below the Line. Above the line, they make investments and they write checks all year long. And so part of the targeting component is, if you're going to target low down on the chain, like say you're 4 or 5 levels below somebody can write a check, if you're selling to business, you need to consider that that's probably more like a B2C play. Because you're trying to go direct to them and probably get them to spend money out of their direct pocket, because they're not going to take you 5 levels up. Like, you don't want to go talk to a technical user of a product who then reports through 3 layers of management to somebody else. That's just not going to be someone you can sell to. So some of those decisions about who you target should be based upon the offering and the size of the offering. So as an example, if your offering is not above 20,000 ARR, you probably should be targeting lower in the organization and find a way to accelerate that based on subscriber use or based upon total people, as opposed to maximizing total dollar spend at the business level. So I feel like I'm going all over the damn place, and I don't know that I answered the question directly.
No, that's good. That's good. I think another lens to look at it is that I'd imagine you see all kinds of mistakes that founders are making. Yeah. Or growing businesses, right, that are trying to, and that $20,000 number is interesting, because I remember 10 years ago, everybody was saying 12,000 was the magic number. Not surprising that number has gone up. So maybe this is a 2-part question. Why 20,000? And then after that, we can go to mistakes. But why is 20,000 the magic number there?
because I've written 2 checks for 16,000 personally on a 2-call close in the last 4 months. So first is what is Ken, his consulting firms and et cetera. What am I, an owner, willing to write on the dime as if I was a B2C sale? So honestly, I could give you all other stuff, but that's the truth. The truth of the matter is I know sitting here that I'll make, I can make something in probably less than an hour and a half of sales meetings, and I can make, a $12,000 to $30,000 decision. So the 20, I will tell you, the 20 may not be the number, but it's based upon your customer acquisition cost, and it's based upon kind of what you need out of it and the lifetime value of your client. If you have, so as an example, we have a client who's really, really great. 72% of the people who buy from them buy again, and they usually buy $1 million. So with that being said, I said, use a regular sales approach, regular salesperson, enterprise sales rep, and I don't care if they buy a bottle of aspirin from you, because the LTV on that customer, the lifetime value is $1 million.
Right.
So, you have to kind of look at it from that perspective. And the 20,000 was really me just drawing a thing in the sand to be very, very tactical. But it's probably somewhere between 20 and 30, to be honest, because I think you can probably play all the way up to 30 in a really, really well done process with, say, a monthly pay or of some sort. Like if you have enterprise sales, you can go to an annual pay, right? So I can get the whole year up front. When you get in that kind of 20 to 30 range, most of the time you can do that, but you'll probably want to do something that's more of a monthly pay. Contract terms will be different. But it's an interesting way to develop velocity.
Yeah. All right. So what mistakes do you see the founders make? Because they're scaling their team, they're trucking along. You come in and do your thing with your group. What's the number one mistake you see?
There are two specific mistakes that they make that the vast majority of founders make. The first one is you don't understand what creates enterprise value. Right? Because, Will, we were talking before the show, and there's the technical founders who are seen as brilliant, and there's the non-technical founders who are seen as the non-technical founders, right? And so what's interesting about us, the technical founders, because that's who everybody wants to invest in, which are smart product people, they believe innovation and product features drives market value. The truth is it only drives cost up, and it actually doesn't drive enterprise value. Because otherwise, the most used statement in investing wouldn't be "show me some more traction."
Right.
So that's one. Enterprise value is driven by sales traction because, so Will, you're an investor. So if I come to you and I say, I have 2 companies, they're $5 million. They're doing $5 million a piece a year, right? One of them, products state of the art. It's going to be something that could revolution. It could be bleeding edge today. It's $5 million.
Right.
They've had a few sales, founder led. I have another one. It's $5 million. Same industry. Product, maybe not as cool. Maybe it's a 15% downdraft, 20% downdraft. It doesn't have all the cool bells and whistles, by the way, that nobody's using anyway. Right. But it doesn't have all the cool bells and whistles. But I come to you and you're an investor, and I come to you in the first one, I show you my sales pipeline and I go, I don't know what the conversion data is. I don't know how many people it takes to get a deal. And I think I'll close 2 more by year end. Second one goes, it takes 14 people to close 2 deals. My current pipeline looks like this, and we add an average of this number every single month. If you'll give me money, I'll pour gas on that. Which one gets a better valuation from you?
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, we oftentimes my group will actually help the earliest stage entrepreneurs with that traction, because that traction is everything. I mean, that's the asset that not only investors are looking at. Investors should be the last people you're thinking about. You should be thinking about hiring a great team, right? The great team's going to sign up, especially for an early stage startup. They want to see that pitch that you just mentioned, right? They want to see, because they're investing, a lot of their compensation is going to be stock in your company. So your first real investors that you need to be thinking about are those employees that are going to come in and join you. But yeah, no, 100%. I think in order to get to that magic place where you're driving your business based on data, right? We coach all of our founders to think through and build financial models where they can pull out all that data that you just mentioned, so that you can just show investors, here's what we're going to pour gas on. And
Mhm.
that's key. And that's key. All right. So then where do you go from there? How do you, let's say the founder teams you're working with are receptive and they're like, all right, Ken, we're game. What do we do? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, we do a couple of things. So one, we always question. It's the reason that I think we're very different from everybody else. We question whether or not. So the question you asked and the convoluted, complicated answer I gave you about, well, who do we target? It's because it's that complicated,
Yeah.
right? And so we question everything when it comes to the ICP and the persona. So that's the first thing we do. Are we targeting the right people? Why are we targeting? What does that look like? Next, we develop messaging that's outcome based upon their priorities. So we work with you to develop that messaging. And then, you know what we do? We don't assume we're right about anything.
Mm,
We test everything. Everything is a hypothesis.
yeah.
The only things that we'll tell you we're really, really right about is everything on the sales systems and process side.
Mm,
We have the best practices. If you follow them, you can triple your close rates, right? We've got that nailed. But when it comes to how you get the top of the funnel filled, whether it's from a marketing or a sales component perspective, we test the messaging. And you have to, one of the problems founders fall into is they see the world in this myopic way that through their lens, and they fail to see how anybody else can see it another way.
mm,
And so when you start that process, you must question everything on the front end, do it quickly and cycle it. And then you must hypothesis test any of your messaging. You can do it through outbound or inbound, or you can do it through outbound or marketing channels, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And then as you run that and understand the best practice and conversion rates, you get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, you pour gas on the stuff that does, and then you continue to iterate.
yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we've been mainly thinking about the hypothetical SaaS company, right? You have a digital
Yeah.
product, you're trying to sell into enterprises, but I'd imagine you probably work with people in other revenue models and other verticals. Like, do you work with e-commerce? Do you work with other type of businesses that are selling things into, you mentioned consumer, the smaller price point. So I'm curious, have you worked with e-commerce, people selling a thing like a direct to consumer thing?
Yeah, we don't do a lot of that. We can, on the marketing side, we have some of those clients, but on the sales consulting side, it's basically B2B.
Yeah.
But we do work. It's interesting because I can kind of presuppose where we could go with this. We definitely have clients in other industries. And so, as an example, we have one client who's a distributor, and they're a distributor. And if you want to talk about how well sales process works, they've gone from just under 100 million to just under 200 million in 2 years.
Hmm.
Process, messaging, the ability to watch conversions and conversations. So, yeah, so we work through a bunch of different stuff. And I think the interesting thing about everything when it comes to B2B anyway, it's all the same. Like I've stood in the boardroom of the 100th largest company in the world, and I've asked the executive vice president of sales, "Hey, how do you do an onboarding? How is it at finding talent? What's the quotient of people who make quota?" And their answers are the exact same as the entrepreneur, as the person who's got 4 salespeople.
Hmm.
The problem is a problem of scale. And so, what is awesome about this and the fantastic opportunity for entrepreneurs is get that right in the beginning. And it's a journey. I was with a company in 2002 to 2006. It was a franchisor who we grew nationally from just under 2 million bucks to 80 in 4 years. And because the systems and processes were right, it was the easiest darn job I had ever had running national sales.
Hmm.
And so if you're a founder, I can tell you it'll get easier knowing what's going on the sales side.
So a lot of these D2C brands, right? They're out there, that they're scaling, they're making all the enterprises nervous, and then they need to have a retail strategy. So now all of a sudden they've been focused on marketing, they've been focused on D2C and all the social media and the paid, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's like, oh, okay, now we actually have to put together a sales team in order to go into retailers to negotiate how we're going to get our widget onto their shelves.
Yep.
Notice are there parallels or differences between sort of a classic B2B digital sales process and hey, we're going to go in and try to land a retail deal?
Yeah. So one of the companies I ran I was senior VP of sales for a company that sold finance solutions through retailers.
Hmm.
Right. So if you wanted to use finance to finance your whatever your thing was in that store, you'd use our money.
Hmm.
So we've gone through that model, right? So
Hmm.
that model actually is interesting because it doesn't, there are things that do not vary. One is customer centric and understanding what it is they need, right? What's important, say, to a retail store, that's space. Well, they want profitability per square foot, probably. They want amount of time. They want to know what their turn is, right? They want to understand these things and what the other opportunities are for the space because they've got a limited amount of space. But what does that really mean? It's the same thing as any other B2B play, because what it says is I have to communicate you within the terms that matter to you.
Hmm.
So those things are the same. Are there differences depending on verticals on how you get the first touch? Yeah, 100%. I'll tell you this right now. If you're calling the average furniture store owned by one guy, they're not going to pick up their phone.
Right.
Right. They're not going to have a corporate email address. It's going to be Gmail. And so you're going to have the classic army on the street.
Right. Right.
But ultimately, most of the stuff you're talking about, the bigger the deal is, the more we have to pay attention to actually the system and the way that we sell and what the process looks like. The smaller the deal, there are some things that we can get away with, because honestly, a lot of those still have to do with the old school stuff of, hey, do I like you?
Right.
Is it inexpensive?
Right.
I'll give it a shot.
Right. Right. So does your group come in and actually assist with the sales, or you do a coaching and set up all the processes and help them with hiring a sales team, or all of the above? Like where is the scope?
Yeah, we don't. It's we have the ability to help a little bit with the sales. For the most part, we try to stay away from it. I used to, early on in our consulting career, I was always a fractional chief sales officer for a company. So I had one a year that I would be the fractional chief sales officer, which meant I was customer facing, had their email address, and was doing large scale deals for them. What that really made me comfortable and confident doing was testing the stuff we taught, testing the processes we put in place.
Yep.
And it made it so I could come to you and say, hey, let me tell you about the deal I was doing with Uber and how I screwed that up and what I did to recover. So that we used to do that a lot, but now essentially what we do most of, we work side by side with the executives, the VPs, whoever it is that's in the process, salespeople. And we work up and down the entire, anybody who's in a revenue producing spot, and we'll help advise on best practices, systems, processes. We may get involved in helping to write some of the messaging. We'll certainly help reset the tech stack if need to. But we're pretty comprehensive. If it's happening on the revenue gen side, outside of actually doing the sales, we've got a resource for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we're almost a couple years in to this pandemic, and I'd imagine it's changed your world and the world of your clients quite significantly. What have we learned? What have you learned? What have your clients learned about how to navigate this, how to pivot?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing is you'd ask a question earlier and you said, what are the mistakes entrepreneurs make? And I got so passionate about the first one, about not understanding the building of enterprise value, that I forgot to tell you the second one. So the second one's lack of focus. And so I think there's probably two things. So one, there's at the entrepreneurial level, and the second component that I would mention is at the macroeconomic environment level, right? So at the entrepreneurial level, business owner, CEO, whether you're in you're pre-seed or whether you're doing 10 million bucks, the biggest problem I'm seeing right now, especially with the dispersed workforce, is your inability to figure out the 3 to 4 levers that you need to pull and putting all of your attention into those things. We're really doing this instead of wearing 3 hats as an entrepreneur. Just picture it's 12-foot long desk covered in hats, and you don't even know which one you're going to be wearing. And so it's really, really hard to move your company forward. And so I would say one of the things that's really gotten lost in the pandemic that has nothing to do with the pandemic yet, it's not directly related, I guess, is the inability of entrepreneurs to understand what they need to do to get to the next level, whatever that is. Right. And so I think that's one. And two is the following, and this is the broader pandemic issue. If you go back and you think back in history and you think back to 9/11, there were a lot of changes that came out of that terrible day.
Yeah.
right? TSA, and then about 1 trillion other things occurred. And those all occurred in the first year and a half, or started to, whatever. I know TSA took a second to get in, but there's all these changes about the way that people viewed flying and the way they viewed other things, the way they consumed what they consumed. Now, what happened as you fast forward is it became this many things, it became a very small number of things that stuck. And so what I think if you look at the pandemic, what you're really going to find is going to happen is the following. There are a lot of things that have changed. The way consumers think and feel about brands has changed. The way they view who they want to be loyal to and faithful has changed. But if you're an entrepreneur, what you need to be thinking about is this. There's noise everywhere. What are the few things that are going to change for your prospects, your customers, and your clients on how they relate to your brand and consume your content? And if you haven't looked at a way to update your messaging or branding or something in the last 12 months, I would tell you you're making a massive mistake.
That's good.
Yeah, I think those are probably the two biggest things. You have to. We've gotten where we have to skate now. Some Wayne Gretzky or somebody said to skate to the puck instead of to where it's going to be as opposed to where it is.
Right.
And you're at a point right now in business. You have to start. The hardest challenge for an entrepreneur in many cases is trying to figure out how to be strategic with something that's going to change the world while at the same time being tactical today. Because you don't have a choice at the size we're talking about. But set your strategic true north, review it every 3 months, but you must know what a successful month, week, and day look like if you want to skate forward. And so some of those things about where we're going, like as an example, in the software world, here's the one thing that's changed, and it's going to change for a minimum of the next 3 years. And I can't imagine if it doesn't go on for a long, long time after that. And that's this. The accessibility to software engineers. The demand is incredibly high. The supply is incredibly low. Well, why does the pandemic affect that? Because it was already a tough position to fill to begin with. But think about all the industries that didn't give a darn about being in mobile or apps that all now are.
Yes.
They are just crushing. They're going, we're going to overpay by 25% for this person. So now you have all this extra massive amounts of demand. So there's one of the things. So you as a business owner, if you're relying on software engineers, what are you going to do to make sure that you can combat that problem?
Yeah. And what I also heard as you were talking about, it was essentially an empathy, right? Like a sensitivity to what the world has gone through these last couple of years. And if you're not changing your messaging or even your branding, even your tone, visuals, or whatever it needs to be, depending on your business, then you're not pivoting sufficiently. Because I see this all the time where, the CEO job, especially of a growing startup, is an impossible job, right? You're always sort of dropping balls, whether you know it or not. It's just a matter of are you picking up the right balls at the right time, but like having to navigate your sales team and your messaging and get your product in place and court new employees and court investors and try to not run out of money. It's really hard. Hard. So so on a more human level then, when you're working with founders that are just struggling, right? There's too many things going on. It's really hard. They're verging toward burnout. Like what is your advice to that entrepreneur, especially in the last couple of years when a lot of people have been seriously struggling, and adding the cost of engineering to another one of those stressor points. Like what's your general advice to these founders?
Yeah, I think I would probably say it like this. Create your moments instead of consuming your news. And what I mean by that is we spend too much time listening. Like, think about the election, and I'm not going to go all the way there. Don't worry about it. But think about the election, right? You got brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and nobody talking to each other when the only thing they can actually do about the damn election is place one vote.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to ruin lifetime friendships and loves. So, so silly. So what I mean by that is, an entrepreneur and you're working on burnout, there's two pieces to this, I think. One of them is routine, and one of them is this idea of creating your own environment. And that is choosing where to put your emotional energies. Like, I really, really protect my energy levels and where I'm pushing that to. And so create what you want it to look like, instead of being somebody who's just receiving all this negativity that's pushing you towards burnout further and further. Create where you want to go. Start taking tactical actions. It comes back to that. What's my strategic true north? Know that you're going to check it every 3 months, but understand tactically what is the most important thing that you got to do today, tomorrow, and next week in order to move your business forward. So that's one. If we get clear on focus, the thing that naturally occurs on it is you make more traction, but even more importantly, you often find you have more time to do the things that you keep saying you can't do. Right? So that's what focus does for you. Say no to some stuff. Right? There's a great book called Essentialism if you want to know how great it is to say no to things.
Yes.
Okay?
Good one.
So say no to some stuff. And then with kind of when you think about that, find something that you can get. I'm not going to say balance. I don't believe in work-life balance. I don't think that exists. And I think it implies a 50-50 split, which, quite frankly, if we're going to work 8 to 10 hours a day, the math just doesn't work. But do find some way to seek work-life alignment, right? Where they're aligned and they run with each other and they run parallel. For me, I'm a big fitness geek, right? So I'm in the gym. It's somewhere between 4 and 6 days a week. I've got my routines. I do my thing. I travel every 4 months for at least a long weekend. Those things allow me to go hard at it in between those moments because I've structured my life in a way where I have work-life alignment.
Yeah. That's good. So at what stage should somebody reach out to you? Like, what is the ideal customer profile for you? What are the things they're thinking about? What are they struggling with? What's the size of their company? Tell us about that.
Yeah, perfect. So typically, we've worked with companies all levels of funded, not funded, privately held, publicly held. I would say where companies come to us is when they've moved, say they've hired their first sales hire, or they're in the process. They say they just got funded and they want to go ahead and expand their sales, and they want to expand and start hiring sales team. That's about as early as we'd get, where they're going from it's been founder-led sales till now, and I'm about to go hiring, because we can help put in the systems, processes, et cetera, and then help them scale that team. Because we can do that on the sales side, and then we can also do that on the marketing side. And a lot of times in that environment, we do like a pay for performance marketing component, where it actually works better for them because we understand the risks associated with it. And so typically anywhere from that, but we will like our ideal client profile, you're either going to having a sales force or you have a sales force. You have aggressive growth goals. You're concerned about, even say you have salespeople today, you're concerned about whether or not they're the right salespeople. You're concerned about whether or not they're actually performing. You've got this inkling in the back of your head that things should be different, but you don't know how to turn the dials to make them different. What I have found with most of our founders is they're frustrated by the lack of production by the sales team, but they continue to let the sales team stay on because they believe sales is an art, not a science.
Right.
And they're like, oh, it'll just work itself out. Well, that's the definition of insanity.
Right.
So I'd say going from founder-led sales, has a sales team, and then we can take you all the way through the process, installing great marketing, installing great sales, getting your tech stack aligned, making life easy.
Awesome. Well, obvious value add. I mean, this is extremely compelling, and I think I really appreciate all the advice that you've shared. Anything else that you would say to the entrepreneurs, the early stage investors, the investors with portfolio companies that they're probably like, oh yeah, I have portfolio company ABC. That's right in that spot. Anything else that you want to share for the audience?
The sales pitch, and then just the kind of the go. If you're an investor who has companies, we get a lot of business from PE and venture capital. If you're an investor who has companies who you feel like they're not growing the way they need to, they're stuck, or they're not creating enterprise value from the sales side, you're only getting it from cost cutting, and there is no focus on sales. Hit me up. We can have literally, I'm not going to sell you anything. We'll just have a conversation. Big picture, massive respect for all the entrepreneurs and all the people who are trying to live their dreams out there. Nobody else understands until you've been there. It's an awesome journey. And I can tell you, as a guy who thought he climbed the mountain, thought he was going to go to an exit, filed bankruptcy, went through 2.5 years where I was just emotionally out of it because it took so much out of me from 2011 to 2013. Mad respect for everybody who wants to go through that process. And the truth is, if you seek out wise counseling, you get people who can help you, been in front of you, whether it be Will's network, anything like that. That is the type of advice that you need to avoid some of the road chapters you've been in. And I appreciate you being out there doing the American thing, because that innovation is ultimately the thing that will drive our economy forward forever.
Yeah. Word. Good word. All right. Where can people find you online? How can they continue the conversation?
Perfect. 3 ways quick. KenLundin.com, LUNDIN.com. RevHeat, REVHEAT, RevHeat.com. That's our marketing agency. But the number one thing, saved it for last, hook up with me on LinkedIn. Just look up Ken Lundin on LinkedIn. I'm sure it'll be on the show notes. And then if something I said in here, you said, man, I just got questions about that. Here's my offer to you. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Tell me that you saw me here with Will. I'll give you a free 30-minute strategy session, and it will not be with one of my salespeople. It won't be with anyone else. You'll get to have a little chat with me, and we'll just try to figure it out. And I promise we'll do everything we can to refer you to somebody who can help you or get you through your problems.
Awesome. Ken, really appreciate your time. Thank you. All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.